Okay, Professor Jim Schultz here from my Finance 670 class. I wanted to go ahead and get right into today's lesson, which is on bond valuation basics. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Before I get started, let me say this. Bond valuation is a very, very complicated topic that has a lot of nuances and intricacies that we are not going to get into in a class like this. My goal, much like it was with time value money, is to simply bring you up to speed on some basics, bring you up to speed on essentially the calculations, the basic calculations of a bond valuation problem. We'll go through all the specific, detailed discussion involving bond valuation when I see you again in Finance 680. So understand that the goal of this lesson is really just to introduce you or reintroduce you to some bond valuation basics and then bring you up to speed on some really, really simple, straightforward calculations. Alright, so the first thing I want to cover, I'm probably going to break this thing down into two parts. In this first part, I'd like to get through the timeline and the variables, and then in the second part, we'll get through bond prices and interest rates and the rest of the things that I have here on the kind of the guide here. Alright, so a bond's timeline. Okay, here's the basic idea. A company would issue a bond if it needs to raise some money for some project that it wants to do. Okay, what you want to understand is that whenever a company needs financing, they can obtain that financing in one of two ways. They can either issue debt or they can issue equity. If they sell bonds, that is issuing debt to the public. So the basic idea is this. They'll say, hey, we need, $30 million worth of debt, by next Friday or by the end of the month or whatever the case may be. And they will make that announcement, and then investors can send money to the firm, and the firm sends the bond or bonds back to the investors. And so that's basically how a bond's timeline begins. The initial transaction is money going from the investor to the company giving the bond to the investor. Now that bond, generally speaking, will be, we'll say, alive for a fixed segment of time. It might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, whatever the case may be. At the end of the bond's life, or when the bond matures, would be the formal term that we would use, this process is reversed. The bond matures, it essentially expires, and assuming the company is still financially solvent, they will return that original investment back to the investor. Now, if those were the only two components of a bond, nobody would buy a bond because you would just be sending the company, $100 and then you'd get your $100 back in 5 years. That doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going to do that. So over the course of the bond's life, the company will make these interest payments or coupon payments to the investors. And so that is essentially what you have when you have a bond. You have an investor loaning money to the company. Periodically, that investor will receive interest payments called coupon payments, and then at the end of the bond's life, he or she, the investor, will be made whole and their original investment will be returned to him or her. Now, the variables that we use in bond valuation, and this is kind of the main reason why I like to cover it right after time value money, is because the variables map directly right back into the time value money variables. We're going to use present value, future value, I, payment, and N. They all have basically the same meaning as we learned in the first lesson with time value money, but they're all a little bit different since now the context that we're in is a little bit more specific. The present value, rather than being referred to as simply some money today, usually represents the bond's current price. Now, I say usually for the same reason that I said it when we learned about time value money, in that most of the time your present value is today. But sometimes, given a certain problem or given a more complicated situation, it might make more sense to make your present value a year from now or 2 years from now or a year ago or whatever the case may be. The future value is going to be the bond's par value. Now, the par value of a bond is the amount of money that an investor has to send the firm to have the bond when it is first issued. Typically, for corporate bonds, the par value of most bonds is set at $1,000. So for the purposes of our class, the par value will always be 1,000. And then when I see you in Finance 680, it may deviate from that a little bit, but not a whole lot, because most corporate bonds are set at a par value of 1,000. And we're only going to deal with corporate bonds in this class and in Finance 680 because we simply don't have the resources and the time to cover both corporate bonds and government bonds. The I, or the interest rate that is in a bond problem, this interest rate comes by three different terms. First is the YTM, or yield to maturity. Second is the required return on the bond. And third is the current market interest rate. Now, I'm going to have a whole lot more to say about all of these when I see you again in Finance 680. It's not really appropriate to go into a really detailed discussion about these right now, because I'm just going to do that again in Finance 680. But I just want to make you guys aware that there are three terms that all point back to the same interest rate in a bond problem. And here's basically what I want you guys to remember right now. All three of these, they all obviously mean something different if you're looking at the problem in a very specific way. But they all point back to the same general meaning. They represent the total return that you're going to earn from owning that bond. So the total amount of money that you can earn from the bond is represented by this interest rate in the time value money variables. Your payment, this is going to be your coupon payment. It's going to be that periodic interest payment that you receive over the bond's life. Now, to find a coupon payment, what you'll oftentimes have in the bond problems is you will be given a coupon rate, and you need to use that rate to find the coupon payment. For example, a bond might have a 5% coupon. To find the coupon payment when you have the coupon rate, it's very simple. You simply take the coupon rate times the par value, and that will give you the coupon payment. So if the coupon rate is 5% and the par value is 1,000, then 5% times 1,000 is $50. So your payment in here would be $50, and that's how you would find the coupon payment. Most bonds are either paid, most coupons on corporate bonds are either paid annually or semi-annually. Now, as you saw in the time value of money section, if the payment is on a certain frequency, the I and the N have to match that frequency. So if you have a semi-annual coupon for a bond, your I and your N must also be in semi-annual terms. And you'll see that when you start looking at the problem sets from the bond valuation practice. And finally, to close out part one here, you have N, pretty much has the same meaning that we saw in the time value money section. It simply is the time until maturity, the number of periods until maturity. That's what it usually is. Sometimes you may need to deviate from that slightly if you're given a more challenging situation, but this happens often enough to be treated as your default setting. So that's it for part one, and I'll see you guys for part two.